Hello, you're on the Scary Stories channel. Sit back and we'll get started. The Castle in the Valley. The road to Oakhaven was less a road and more a scar carved into the flank of the Whisperwind Mountains. It twisted and bucked. A serpent of cracked asphalt swallowed by an insatiable forest that seemed to lean in, whispering secrets from its shadowed depths. Elias Thorne, a man accustomed to the sterile glow of a city office, gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The GPS had long since given up, leaving him to navigate by the dubious directions scribbled on a damp napkin by a gas station attendant with eyes that seemed to hold too many untold stories. His destination: Blackwood Manor, a name that tasted like dust and cobwebs on the tongue. It was his inheritance, a forgotten appendage of his family tree that had suddenly, inexplicably, fallen to his lap after the death of a distant great-aunt he'd never known existed. The solicitor had described it as a property of considerable historical interest, a polite euphemism, Elias suspected, for a crumbling money pit. As dusk bled across the sky, painting the clouds in bruised purples and ominous grays, the trees began to thin. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and cold. Then, through a sudden break in the canopy, he saw it. It stood in a deep, sun-starved valley, an imposing silhouette against the dying light. Blackwood Manor. Not a manor, he realized with a jolt, that went deeper than mere surprise, but a castle. Its stone walls, once proud, were now crumbling, cloaked in a thick, dark ivy that made it appear as if the very forest were attempting to reclaim it. Turrets like broken teeth pierced the twilight sky, and a single, immense archway, once the entrance to a grand courtyard, yawned like a forgotten mouth. The silence that fell over the valley was absolute, a profound stillness that seemed to swallow even the faint hum of his engine. A shudder ran through Elias. He'd expected an old house, perhaps a little run down. Not this. This was a mausoleum, a relic, an impossible burden. He drove slowly, the crunch of his tires on the gravel path the only sound. The massive iron gates, twisted and rusted, stood ajar as if inviting him into a forgotten dream. He parked in the overgrown courtyard. The air here was even colder, prickling his skin. A gust of wind, sudden and sharp, moaned through the broken windows of the castle, a desolate, sorrowful sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to abandon this place to its silent, dark decay. But something else, a morbid curiosity, a sense of obligation to the unknown great-aunt, held him fast. Oh, taking a deep breath, Elias stepped out of the car. The stone underfoot was slick with moss. The castle loomed, a titan of shadow and silence. He found the main entrance, a heavy oak door studded with black iron. It took all his strength to push it open. It groaned, a sound like a dying beast, and swung inward to reveal a cavernous darkness. The air inside was stagnant, tasting of dust, decay, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet like old blood. His flashlight bead cut through the gloom, revealing a grand hall. Cobwebs hung like tattered shrouds from the high ceilings, and the floor was littered with fallen plaster and debris. Tapestries, once vibrant, now hung in shreds, their scenes of ancient hunts and forgotten feasts rendered grotesque by time and shadow. The silence was not empty. It was a presence, heavy and watchful. Elias walked further in, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. He found a grand staircase, its balustrade intricately carved with what looked like grotesque gargoyles, their faces contorted in silent screams. A sense of unease, sharp and insistent, began to claw at him. He felt as if he were being watched, not by a person, but by the very walls of the castle. He explored the ground floor, each room a testament to forgotten grandeur and encroaching ruin. The library was a graveyard of books, their pages brittle, their knowledge lost to time. The ballroom, once a scene of gaiety, was now a vast, empty space, its parquet floor buckled, a single broken chandelier hanging precariously from the ceiling like a skeletal hand. As he ventured deeper, a subtle change occurred. The cold intensified, and a faint, almost imperceptible chill began to permeate his bones. He noticed peculiar details, a stain on a marble floor that resembled a blossoming dark flower, too perfect to be random, the faint scent of ozone in certain corridors, and the way his own shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, taking on a life of its own in the wavering beam of his flashlight. He found the kitchen, a vast, echoing space with a massive, cold hearth. A single rusted cleaver lay on a butcher block, an unsettling anachronism in the silent room. As he shone his light around, he caught sight of something in the corner, a small porcelain doll, its painted eyes wide and unblinking, lying face down amidst a pile of rubble. Elias felt a sudden, inexplicable revulsion and quickly averted his gaze. He decided to explore the upper floors. The staircase creaked ominously with each step. On the first landing, he paused, his heart thumping. He heard it then, a whisper, thin and reedy, like wind sighing through dry leaves. He spun around, shining his light into the darkness, but there was nothing, just the profound silence of the castle. He dismissed it as the wind, a trick of the acoustics in this ancient structure. The upper corridors were narrower, darker. The air grew heavier, making it difficult to breathe. He passed numerous closed doors, each one a potential doorway into a past he couldn't comprehend. He tried a few, but they were all locked or jammed, refusing to yield their secrets. Then he reached a particular door. It was made of dark, heavy wood, adorned with tarnished brass fittings. Unlike the others, it was slightly ajar, a sliver of deeper darkness visible within. A faint, cloying scent, like decaying roses, wafted from inside. A chill, unlike any he had felt before, seeped into his very marrow. He pushed the door open. The room was a bedroom, or what was once a bedroom. A four-poster bed, its canopy long since rotted away, stood in the center, shrouded in dust. But it was not the dust or the decay that held his attention. On the wall opposite the bed, obscured by decades of grime, was a series of carvings. They were crude, deeply etched into the stone, depicting figures in various states of terror and agony. One figure, centrally placed, was particularly disturbing, a gaunt, skeletal being with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, seemingly presiding over the tormented visages of the others. Elias' blood ran cold. These weren't artistic flourishes. They were frantic, desperate scrawls carved by someone in extreme duress. As his flashlight beam lingered on the carvings, he noticed something new. Beneath the central figure, almost imperceptibly, was a name, scratched into the stone: Isolde. A sudden, sharp clang echoed from downstairs, shattering the oppressive silence. Elias jumped, heart hammering against his ribs. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. He stood rooted to the spot for a moment, listening, straining to hear over the rapid thump of his own pulse. Silence again, profound and unsettling. He backed out of the room, his eyes still fixed on the doorway, half expecting something to emerge from the darkness within. He hurried down the corridor, his mind racing, trying to rationalize what he had seen and heard. The wind, the old house settling, his own overactive imagination. He reached the main hall again. His car keys, which he had left on a small table near the entrance, were no longer there. His breath hitched. He distinctly remembered placing them there. He searched frantically. his flashlight beam darting around the dusty expanse. Nothing. A cold dread began to coil in his stomach. He wasn't alone. Then he heard it again. Not a whisper this time, but a distinct sound like a faint, mournful hum coming from deeper within the castle, perhaps from the bowels of the building itself. It was the kind of sound that vibrated not just in the air, but in the very bones. Panic, cold and unreasoning, began to set in. He needed to get out. Now. He raced back to the main door, pushing against it with desperate force. It was jammed, not just stuck, but barred. He tried again, throwing his weight against it, but it wouldn't budge. He was trapped. The faint humming grew louder, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate the very floor beneath his feet. It was coming from the direction of the kitchen, and with it, the cloying scent of decaying roses intensified, thick and sickly sweet. Elias's eyes darted around the hall. The gargoyles on the staircase seemed to leer at him. The tattered tapestries seemed to writhe in the shadows. He had to find another way out. He remembered a small, dilapidated door he'd seen near the back of the kitchen, possibly leading to a cellar or a servant's exit. It was his only hope. He ran, the sound of his shoes slapping against the stone floor deafening in the echoing silence. The hum grew louder, a chilling symphony of unseen horrors. He burst into the kitchen. The rusted cleaver on the butcher block glinted in his flashlight beam. The porcelain doll, which he had seen face down earlier, was now sitting upright, its wide painted eyes fixed on the doorway as if watching him. The humming was deafening now, vibrating from the floor, the walls, the very air. It was coming from the cellar door. A faint, sickly green light began to emanate from the cracks around the doorframe. Elias didn't hesitate. He lunged for the cellar door, a flimsy thing of rotting wood. He yanked at the handle, but it was locked. He slammed his shoulder into it, once, twice. On the third try, with a splintering groan, it gave way. A rush of cold, foul-smelling air assaulted him. The green light intensified, illuminating a steep, winding stone staircase, disappearing into utter blackness. The humming reached a crescendo, and Elias could now distinguish something else within it, a multitude of whispers, tangled and indistinct, like 1,000 anguished voices speaking at once. He scrambled down the steps, not daring to look back. The air grew colder, wetter, thicker. He could hear water dripping somewhere in the blackness below. The whispers seemed to swirl around him, brushing against his ears, sometimes coalescing into fragments of words. Isolde. Never trapped. He reached the bottom. The air was frigid, damp. The green light, now a faint glow, came from a pool of still, dark water in the center of the chamber. And in the water just beneath the surface he saw something. It was a form, indistinct at first, then chillingly clear. A pale, translucent figure, its eyes hollow and dark, its mouth agape in a silent scream. It was reaching, its skeletal hands stretching towards him from the murky depths. It was the figure from the carvings, the gaunt, tormented being. Isolde. The whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of sorrow and rage. The cold, wet hands of the entity in the water seemed to reach out, intangible yet terrifyingly real towards him. He could feel its despair, its ancient, unholy hunger. Elias screamed, a raw, primal sound torn from his throat. He stumbled backward, scrambling up the steps, not caring about the bruising impacts of stone against his shins. The spectral form in the water writhed, its silent scream echoing in his mind. He burst back into the kitchen, gasping for air. The porcelain doll was still there, its painted eyes now seeming to follow him. He didn't stop, didn't look back. He ran through the kitchen, through the grand hall, ignoring the locked main door. He knew with a horrifying certainty that the castle had no intention of letting him leave. He ran back to the car, fumbling for his phone. No signal. He pounded on the windows, desperate, realizing the impossibility of his situation. He was truly trapped. The humming began again, louder now, coming from within the very walls of the castle. The green light, like a spectral dawn, began to bleed through the windows of the lower floors, casting long, unholy shadows across the courtyard. He watched, horrified, as the shadows began to coalesce, to thicken, to take on form. Not individual entities, but a collective darkness, a living shroud that pulsed and shifted, drawing closer to the car. The whispers rose to a furious wail, filling the valley. Elias pressed himself against the car door, his eyes wide with terror. He could feel the cold radiating from the approaching darkness, a cold that promised not just death, but eternal conscious torment. The very air around him seemed to crackle with malevolence. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed the car, before the whispers became a deafening roar in his mind, was the silhouette of Blackwood Manor against the moonless sky. Its broken teeth of turrets seemed to grin, and the great archway, its ancient mouth, seemed to yawn wider, ready to swallow him whole into its forgotten, agonizing history. The castle in the valley had claimed another soul.